everyone, I'm Dan O'Mani. I'm an Executive Vice President and the General Manager of Inkhouse San Francisco. I'm with my awesome colleague, Ann Baker, SVP, also in our San Francisco office, although I think she's in Southern California right now.
That's true.
Yeah. Ann, how long have we been working together? More than 6 years?
Together more than 6 years.
Almost 6.5.
Feels like a lifetime.
Yeah, a lifetime has been the last 2 weeks. Well, I'm really excited to dive into this topic because I feel like it's something that affects us, but I also just find personally fascinating, which is this growing distrust in media and what's happening specifically in the Bay Area as it relates to VCs and tech companies that are sort of saying that maybe they don't have to talk to press, especially as press have gotten more skeptical, a little bit more negative, and certainly much more likely to scoop and try to tear down technology companies. So with that in mind, I mean, what do you think is sort of behind this shift and what's happening?
Yeah, I think what we're really feeling in tech right now is something that you might call the Theranos effect, where, Theranos, of course, was a company that was really high flying. Elizabeth Holmes, the founder, featured on the cover of magazines, was really held up by the tech press as this genius. And that was a period of time where tech was super cool, right? Like, there was this idea that people were leaving finance jobs in New York to come and work in tech, and it had like glamour and excitement. And when Theranos fell, it fell really hard. And I think there were two things that came out of that. One, a feeling among the tech press that they got burned really bad. So anyone who wrote a glowing profile of her and the company that was not particularly critical or as inquisitive as it could have been about how the technology actually worked ended up looking pretty silly and really bad. And then secondly, John Carreyrou, the Wall Street Journal reporter who broke the story, or series of stories about the various ways that Theranos had been lying to the public and misrepresenting itself, became a celebrity. He had a big book. He got a lot of attention for that. And I think that the response among the tech press was like, one, I can't lob softballs anymore because it might burn me if this company ends up to be not what it says it is. And two, like, hey, I want to be the John Carreyrou of this situation. And so that led to a tech press that is a lot more skeptical, a lot more aggressive. And the bloom has really come off the rose on these tech companies. They've had issues with sexism, with racism, questions about privacy, questions about, should technology even exist in this way? What is its culpability in, say, insurrections against the government? And so you have a dynamic where you have a press corps that is more skeptical than it ever has been. And you have venture capitalists and tech companies that are feeling like, hey, why are you being so aggressive towards me? Like, I'm out here trying to change the world with my tech. And so it's creating a really negative feedback loop between the two parties.
Yeah,
That's what I'm seeing.
No, I mean, I think that's really well put. I think that for a while there, tech sort of had an underdog status when it didn't totally deserve it anymore. Like, tech had just gone completely mainstream. There were founders who were repeat founders that were millionaires being funded by these huge VCs. So it wasn't really an underdog story anymore, but it kind of was written that way. And I feel like reporters, like you said, felt a little bit burned. But what I find interesting too is like, some of the backlash I've seen more, so that's all totally fair, but some of the backlash I've seen, if we're being direct about it, is just some VCs and CEOs have been very rudely treated, very rudely on like Twitter, and they're like, I don't want to talk to this reporter anymore. And so I think what's also happening is, companies are doing what other more traditional industries have done, which is said, why would we talk to a reporter, like, if all it's going to be is negative? Like, let's just not comment and let's move on. So it's like you said, it's not just that, the underdog status is gone, but yeah, they've just really become, more broad, where reporters are less interested in writing these fluff pieces, like you said. So it's been really fascinating.
I agree. I mean, I think it's a feeling like I don't really need you. And if this is going to be the tone and the vibe, why would I talk to you? And I do think it's too bad, because we need a tech press that has sources, that is able to report on what's going on with these big companies that are heavily involved in our day-to-day lives. And I think that both parties probably need to reassess how they're thinking about one or the other. Do you have to be rude, frankly, from a reporter's standpoint? They can get on the phone and be rude, and that will lead a CEO or a venture capitalist to say, like, why am I doing this? Wait, like, I have 15 minutes. I'm giving my time to this person. Why are they being a jerk to me? Not aggressive reporting is one thing, rudeness is another. And then on the other side, I think I want to see companies recognize the value of a free and open press, to understand that these are people who are doing their job, who have an important role to play in protecting consumers, protecting democracy. And so we all kind of need to like play a little bit nicer than we have been.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think it comes down to like, who do you reach via tech press that's important to your business, right? So like, let's look at Coinbase, right? So they did something big in this sort of shift where there was a New York Times story coming about some pending lawsuits, and I think existing lawsuits, particularly for people of color who felt they've been passed up on promotions or sort of pushed out of the company unfairly compared to their white counterparts. And they published a blog post saying that it was BS, and they put that out before the New York Times story. And so, if I'm a Coinbase customer, I don't even know if I'm paying attention to any of this. But if I'm an employee, I think those are the people who are probably really scrutinizing this really heavily, because, tech press doesn't necessarily reach your customer, but it certainly does reach your employee base. And so, one thing that our founder, Beth Monahan, wrote up in a blog post recently was like, if you don't engage with press, other employees at your company will, right? So like, the press isn't going away because you're going to ignore them. And so the other factor is like, if you antagonize them and just don't talk to them, you are going to, you're going to reap what you sow in that sense, right? And then you'll start to see some of these articles come out, and I think that employees will start to, this will have a big impact on employees and other audiences that are relevant to those companies.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess what we should say is like, where we are right now is you have a set of influential venture capitalists and tech companies, I think Tesla being a particularly notable one, that has sort of like canceled public relations.
Right.
They're like, we're not going to talk to the press anymore. We're going to fire our entire PR department, and we're just going to have our own owned news channels, and that's all we're going to do. And if you want to know what's going on at my company, you can come and read my blog post about it or watch my video or whatever. And for a certain segment of companies, that is an approach that will absolutely work. I mean, let's be honest, like Elon Musk can do whatever he wants. He sneezes and it's on the front page of the New York Times.
Right.
So like, if you're him, why would you, sort of like try and make nice with reporters? But I do think that if you are a company that is young, that is trying to get attention, that is trying to reach very specific audiences, to say like, oh yeah, I'm going to write a blog post and then like TechCrunch is going to cover me for that. It's like, well, do they even know who you are? Why would you assume that they're reading your blog post? They're probably not.
Yep.
Um,
No, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because I've been thinking about that, because I think part of what gave rise to this was there was a little bit of a news cycle around Tesla eliminating its comms team. I think, we know from folks that we know at that company that actually had happened earlier, but it kind of became news later. But I agree, because Elon Musk tweets and more people see it than if TechCrunch covers Tesla, right? I mean, look at Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg posts on Facebook on his own platform, and that scale is way bigger than any one news article, not to mention the amount of control that he has on what goes out there, and the amount of time it takes, right? Like, compared to how, interacting with reporters, it takes time, and it's not always, you don't always get the result you want. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's the other question, is like, is replicating Tesla really viable? Like, you can't just start acting like Tesla. Like, you can't just start acting like Facebook. Like, those companies have spent years building up a really, really big following. And I also think those are two consumer brands that people interact with. Most people have an opinion on. But if you're a Series B company that like does something that enterprise IT buys, I think that over time you can build a following of people that care about that sort of thing, but you're never going to reach that scale that those other companies have. So I guess my question is like, from your opinion, like if people are thinking about replicating this as far as building their own following, like what should they be doing? And putting aside the whole like not talking to reporters for a second, because that's a whole set of problems.
What I would say is that I think there's this idea that it's like binary, right? It's like you either go all in on one approach and that's going to be your key to getting where you want to go, or you go all in on the other. And the reality is that it should be both.
Yeah.
Inkhouse was founded by Beth in 2007 with the idea that companies need to have a blog. That sounds really like silly now, but that was actually like kind of a new idea. Like you should have Twitter, you should have a blog, you should be communicating with your prospective employees, your customer base, your investor base directly. And so it needs to be a little bit of both. You need to think about, okay, what am I trying to do here? First and foremost, any strategic communications program has to start with like, what am I trying to do? What are my business goals? How can communications help me achieve those business goals? And so if you are trying to hire, think about where the people that you're trying to hire live. Are you trying to expand your engineering team? Okay, well then maybe you need to think about a strategy that would include actively posting on Reddit, thinking about Product Hunt, thinking about TechCrunch, thinking about places where the people that you're trying to hire consume news, consume information. And that can mean media reporters, but it can also mean other kinds of forums and message boards. So it doesn't have to be like never talk to the press again, or like only talk to press and don't have a blog. It's a waste of time. Like it has to be both. Why are we trying to make it like it should only be one thing and not the other?
And I think that's where the sort of emotion around people being angry at press is sort of driving it. Like we need to throw this out and move to something new. But I think they also complement each other, right? And again, you're right. Like I am biased here, but like I've seen it work. And I also know that if I was starting today and I wanted to eventually have the scale and the following that a Tesla does, yeah, I would need to invest, but the credibility you get automatically from being covered by reporters, it would take years to get that on your own, right? And so, I think there's a lot of benefits to going sort of the owned route, right? And the sort of approach where you're saying we're going to create our own content, and we're going to host it ourselves, so that way we know that what we say is what gets out there, and there's no chance of it being misinterpreted. And then we're going to have people that are relevant to us start to share it. I get that approach, but if you balance it with like, hey, through one creative story idea and a news hook, we got into an outlet that reaches millions of people. You can't ignore that, or that the fact, and also the fact that will in turn drive people to your website, and that'll drive people to your social media handles and your YouTube channels and whatever the case might be. So it's the idea that it has to be one or the other, I think, is one, unrealistic, and two, short-sighted. And so I totally agree with you there. And I also think, to your point, some companies, this will always be relevant for them because maybe they're so niche and they target such a unique audience that mainstream press is hard to get in a consistent basis. And so building, destinations where, like, if I am a chief legal officer, right, very small group, right, or head of compliance at a company, there's probably only so many of those folks out there. So going targeted and going owned makes sense. But if you're targeting like the HR department, you need to go broad, and that's where you need both, right? And so like understanding your audience should just be at the core. And if you go more the owned route or go the media route, it should start with what you want your audience to do, not what you just think would be great for your company, right? It has to start with that goal. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the other thing that we're seeing is like the nicheification, if that's a word that I can possibly make up right now, of audiences even further, right? Like that was one thing that the internet created, is like there used to only be so many channels on TV or so many media outlets that anyone had access to. And then thanks to the internet, those audiences could become divergent. Okay, well, that's even going to a further degree because now you have all these journalists who have been working at TechCrunch, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, whatever. And they're like, hey, this ecosystem isn't working for me. I'm just going to go direct to my readers who are extremely specific and write a newsletter for them, and they'll pay me $5 a month or whatever it is to do it. Our great colleague, Ryan Ferguson, wrote an amazing blog post for Inkhouse about the Substack revolution, right? So like companies need to think about that too. Like if there's someone out here writing a newsletter that is super specifically for like moms who are interested in DIY projects of a certain kind, and you are a company that helps them find projects that they should do, and you're not going to bother to engage with that newsletter writer because you're like, I hate all reporters, like, dude, you're really missing out. So it's all just like, it comes back to goals. It's so basic, but it's like, it comes back to goals. It comes back to thinking about what you're trying to accomplish, and then looking at all the many tools in your toolbox and making it work together. It's not all or nothing.
I agree. I have a couple of things. First of all, I think it's funny that your example was DIY moms and mine was chief legal officers. I think it's,
yeah, right.
but also, I think that's also like a tech move. Like that's actually a tech trend in that anybody can publish now. And so what it's done is, I think it has made it like, I mean, if we're being very honest, it's made it harder for people to know how much they can trust their news source, and instead going direct to companies. But what it also means, I think, is I still think media relations is a key differentiator, but when you're producing your own content, quality is the differentiator, because there are a lot of people putting out bad content today. And so because it's so easy, and because it's like not as much of like a, oh, you have to build a huge following, like anybody can do this if they have a website. The way to stand out is like it's all like fast food content, and we're like, you want to be serving something much more like, you know, high quality. And so it's made, I think, the quality of content like more important than ever. If anybody can be a publisher basically for free, then like the good stuff sort of rises to the top, you know?
I think that's such an important point. I definitely think that people think that content creation is like a lot easier than it looks. Anyone can make a TikTok. It takes 30 seconds.
Right.
Yeah, anyone can do it. Can anyone create a good one? Probably not, right? So like this idea that I'm going to be my own source of like coverage and content for and speak directly to my audiences is a really nice idea in theory. But if you don't have a dedicated person internally who's actually going to own that, if you don't have someone who knows how to write, who can edit, who can make sure that the content that they're producing is actually relevant to the audiences you're trying to reach, all of that stuff doesn't happen on autopilot, right? It needs to be a really deliberate process. And so you want to make sure that if you are doing an owned content push, which we totally endorse, you got to have the right people around you to do it.
I think it's easy to pump out a lot of content. And I think it's easy to occasionally pump out occasional good pieces of content. It is hard to create a lot of good content. That's the thing, right? Like you and I could like talk about this like on ends, but like, you know, they're writing a few blog posts a week, if you don't care about the quality, is not that hard. But if you care about the quality, that's actually a very, very hard challenge. There's only so many people that can do that, you know? And so, and to your point, have it tie back to the audiences that matter to you. So I also think this is a grossly or underestimated undertaking, because to have it be a living, breathing thing where you're producing, like everyone wants to be a newsroom or a publisher. I mean, that's not easy. If it was easy, like, I mean, like this is the whole newspaper business. This is the whole news reporting business. Like it's very, very hard, you know, and it's harder than ever. So like, I do think it's funny how time and again, Silicon Valley has sort of this unfortunate belief that they can go do whatever is happening elsewhere better than whoever's involved.
Better than the subject matter experts. I mean, how many companies have blogs that haven't been updated in like 2 months?
Right. Or it's like the last 3 things have been like 2 paragraphs about a company's announcement and something that's not going to be all that interesting to the reader. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Last question I have for you is that, you know, I've been in PR since 2007. I think you started in 2009. Am I wrong? Right about that?
I mean,
sure. So like, this isn't the first time I've heard people talk about like the relevance of news media going away. It does feel like with Trump and everything that's been happening, like it's gotten like a little more of a boost. And, there's time and again studies about how people don't trust the information they see and aren't even sure like if what they saw was real. But like, I had a great chat with Alex Wilhelm a couple months ago, and he was like, the media is not going away. He's like, it'll change, and some areas are going to be really under resourced, especially local news. But there will always be, the media. And so I guess, if we assume media isn't going away, but the landscape is changing, like what should a startup founder be thinking about in terms of like engaging with press while also building their own following?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that the death of media is greatly exaggerated. I went to journalism school myself and graduated from college during the height of the recession. And all of my journalism teachers were like, this job is literally not even going to exist. And you know what? It still exists. So I definitely think that journalism is here to stay. And we should also say that we love journalists. Attacks on journalists of any kind, like a personal attack, call to violence towards journalists, the fake news media, all of that it's not okay. It's bad for democracy, and it's bad for the tech industry too, right? Like a press that is challenging tech companies to be better for their consumers is better for everyone. So just to get on my soapbox for a second, we love reporters and we really want to help make sure that they continue to be able to do a good job, because as consumers of technology, we have an interest in that as well. I think if you're a startup looking to engage with a reporter, the main thing you have to do is like, what am I going to tell this reporter that is actually interesting? I think way too many people think that a reporter should want to take their call just because they're like breathing air, right? Like, I'm here, I raised some money, I can consume oxygen. I don't understand why the
Right.
Times isn't like talking to me all the time. And we're like, well, what are you going to say to them? Like, you breathe, that's cool. You have to make sure that your story is good and it's interesting. And you know how you could know if your story is good? You could subscribe to the New York Times and read some articles and see the kind of stories that they publish and say, wow, my story's not as good as that one. Like, I got to work on it more, right? So make sure you have something interesting to say. And I think that applies to everything you're doing.
Exactly.
To our point about owned content creation, if you want it to be good, make sure that it actually is interesting and has something to say.
Yeah.
Make it good. If you're going to spend the time doing it, make it good.
I agree. And I think reading the news and even reading content now at this point is like one of the most underutilized ways to just sharpen your own abilities. And that's beyond us as PR people, but anyone, because if you don't apply that to how you message yourself, how do you expect people to care? And it's not just to, click on one story every once in a while. It's like to actually come back, right? And say like, what has you coming back? What has you sharing? Like what has you passing that story along? So, well, Anne, this has been awesome to chat and catch up. I love this topic. I love talking about this topic with you. It'll be really interesting to see how 2021 goes. I think there's a lot of good on the horizon as far as like this owned content stuff comes. I think the big thing is making sure that the media and the startups and the VCs all play nicely together as well as they can.
That would be good. They should play nice. Get
Yeah.
along.
Yeah.
It would be better for everybody.
I agree.
Thank
Well, thanks,
you.
Anne. Yeah.
Good
Good
to talk to you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.